Hey there, CPO here. In the last video that I did working on this 2004 TJ Wrangler here, I showed you the troubleshooting of figuring out why it wouldn't start when I turned the key. This video, I'm gonna do the repair. So what I'm gonna change out is the ignition actuator and the ignition switch. The ignition switch isn't broken yet, but while I'm in there taking it out, it's such a cheap part, I'm just gonna go ahead and replace that anyway. So let's get to it. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and replace this, but before I do, I'll show you what I'm doing. So I pulled off the steering column cover. There's just a couple of standard Phillips head screws holding in that. And then I removed this, and I'll show you why here in a second. There's basically two Torx, these are T15s that hold that on. You don't have to remove the whole thing, you just need to be able to lift it up to get to this ignition switch here. So this is your cylinder for your lock. This is where your key goes into. Your actuator pin for the ignition is underneath here, and then your actual ignition switch is underneath here. So the pin assembly is sandwiched in between these two, so we have to remove those to get to that. I went ahead and also bought a new replacement ignition switch since I've got to take it apart anyway. May as well just replace that. It was only like 17 bucks. So, all right, so this is the Dorman ignition actuator. There is a little spring in here, so don't lose that. This guy here. And then this is the assembly. There is instructions about how this needs to be set up. Basically this little brass pin, this little brass tab needs to be on this side of that little plastic piece. You can actually push it loose. Here, I'll do it. See where it goes? Now it's on the wrong side. You want it to be like that. So where the brass is sort of still caught there. And that'll make more sense later. And then this is the ignition switch that, like I said, I'm just gonna replace it since I'm in there anyway. And I did go to Harbor Freight and get a security bit set. It was like 6 bucks. You need a T10 security bit. It's basically a Torx with a little hole in it. Ignition switch and the actuator pin all are held in with these guys. All right, so the very first thing I'm gonna do is remove this lock cylinder. In order to do that, you have to have the key, and you're gonna turn the key into the on position, and that will allow you to depress this guy right here. There's just a little push thing. Once you do that, you can remove the cylinder and the whole assembly will come out. All right, so the reason we had to remove this multi-function switch is to get in here to that top bolt or that top screw. So that one screw there is all that's holding this in place other than the assembly. All right, so now I'm gonna pull off this cover here, and that has this guy right here. And then finally this guy. But you're gonna wanna hold it with one hand as you loosen this because it's spring loaded. So I'd hold it up with one hand while you remove this final screw. All right, then as you pull it, you'll be able to see where that spring goes, and I'll leave it in place. So you can see right there, there's a little square nipple, and that's where the spring goes. And the other end of that spring is gonna go in this little reservoir here on the cover. All right, so now, kind of maneuvering this around these wires, trying not to have to take them out. There we go. All right. To release this ignition switch, see if I can show you here, there's a little red push tab. You want to open that up, and that will allow you to depress the release. All right, so here's that actuator and ignition switch assembly. In order to pull this out, it's basically just clipped in, and I think the easiest thing to do is just apply a little pressure and work it out, and boom, oh, check it out. So yes, this was definitely my problem because this is broken. Here's the piece that broke off. I don't even know where that goes. Oh, just like that. So this is broken. So that's why when you turn the key, it's not triggering the ignition, which would then engage that starter control wire that we tested earlier that wasn't getting any power. So yeah, there we go. It's good when you think you have a problem and you take it apart and find definitely that's the problem. So now we'll reassemble everything and hopefully be good. All right, so before I assemble this, I want to show you how it all works together, because I think that'll help you sort of visualize what you're doing on the install. Because some people just say, oh, well, just put it back all the way you took it out. Well, that's easier said than done. So what I want to show you is how these three parts all sort of work together and how they connect, so that as you're doing the install, you can keep that in mind and it will help you make sure you're doing the right thing. All right, so first, let's start with the middle piece. This is the actuator, and I believe this block here is also what locks the steering wheel in place. So it's designed to be installed and removed with the key in the run position. So on the bottom here, there's some arrows. You can see clearly one on the top, and then there's one on that bottom one. And you want to make sure that those are lined up whenever you install it. What that's going to do is put this in the right place to receive the other end of this. So this is what turns that when you turn the key. So when you install it into the dash, those are going to lock together. And see how it goes spring-loaded that way? That's also why that metal tab has to be on this side of that little raised section, so that you can compress that. All right, so that little star thing goes into that little hole, and then having those arrows lined up there is what allows that alignment to happen on the inside, okay? So the next is the ignition switch and this actuator pin. So the end of this is squared, and that's keyed to fit inside that ignition switch. And when you rotate the key, this is what turns that switch. So everything you feel, all those clicks and detents, you know, from the off, on, run, and then all the way over to start and back, all that is really happening in this, the ignition switch. See inside there, you can see it is sort of rectangular shaped. It's basically keyed to match that rectangular shape, which is why when that breaks, it no longer turns. So when you're putting everything together, this is going to be set in the run position, just by the way we just set it up with those arrows. This should be in the run position if you're not replacing it. If you pulled it out to do the repair, it probably is in the run position. However, if you're like me and you bought a brand new one, it may not be in the run position. So you need to make sure that it is, so that this lines up. And basically what you're looking at is the angle of this. It's I'd say at about a 40-degree angle with this end down. And so when I look at it, I want this keying to match that, so when it all goes together, it will slip inside. Okay? So I'm not going to do it here. I'm going to do it once this is in place, because otherwise everything sort of gets out of alignment, which is not what we want. Okay? So if you need to adjust how this is positioned, you can take a small flathead screwdriver and turn it manually. So here, I feel like that's the off, on, run, and then in the start, it springs back into place, back to accessory and off. So you should be able to feel that, but if not, like I said, just look at the angle of that and make sure that that matches the angle of this guy. So now we're going to install these components. All right, so I'm going to start with this. So again, I'm making sure that this tab is in the right position. Everything sort of freely moves, and then underneath, making sure those arrows line up on the bottom. And of course, that's going to make that little plastic piece align with your key cylinder. So once that's all ready and set, this is just going to go right up into here and basically just going to slip in there, and it'll hold just from friction alone. Once you have that, make sure your key is in the run position. You'll know it's in the run position if this little bottom detent can be pressed. If it's in any other position, that won't press, right? So get it to where that presses, and then you know you're in the run, and then it's going to slip with that pointing straight down right in there. And if it doesn't go, you can sort of align and adjust, and it's going to click in. Once it clicks in, you should be able to cycle it back and forth. Okay, and then get it back into the run position, which again, you'll find it whenever this little detent can be pressed. So even though I don't want to remove it again, I just want to make sure I put the key in a place where that can be depressed. Next is the ignition switch. All right, so this is sort of a feel thing. You've got that plastic piece that's going to go inside a hole, and then it's going to line up with that, and basically assuming you've got everything lined up, it should slip on. You can sort of manipulate the key a little bit and see it just pushed on a little bit further. That helps me feel like it's lined. When I move the key, it moves the ignition switch. That tells me it's keyed in there where I want it to be. Now I'll take that security screw and get that ignition switch screwed into place. So it goes on really easy if you know and understand how they all work together and can feel them sort of connect together, right? If you try and force anything, it's just not going to be good. So now, you see how my key springs forward and then back, where before it would just not? That means I'm connected to that ignition switch, and I can run the whole gamut. So yeah, I'm good to go there. I'm still in the on position. Now what I'm going to do is add that spring and this bottom piece. Spring is going to go inside that little detent, and then over this little, I call it a nipple, but whatever that square thing is, whatever you call that square thing. And then inside that detent, again, not forced, definitely spring loaded. And then these two security screws are going back in. Once you get that first one, it should hold just fine. Okay, there we go. Now my key release works. Okay, I'm gonna turn it off. Now I'm gonna plug in the harness into the ignition switch back here, and then relatch that little safety latch. And that is it. Should we test it before I put everything back together? Nah, I feel good about it. All right, so now just putting back in the screws to hold the multifunction switch back in place. If you're interested in replacing this, I did a video on that, so you can, I called it the everything switch, but you can search my YouTube channel for that. Also, I did a video on repairing this wiring connection here for this harness. That was a big one. So make sure you look at that if you have problems with that. So everything in here now is pretty much new, other than the cylinder. So yeah, that's why I went ahead, since I'm in here, that's why I went ahead and replaced this guy, because I'm replacing so many little things individually. I'm like, well, I've got it out, I'm just gonna change it, screw it. All right, so now just putting the clamshell back together. These little rubber pieces sort of slide around. For this, you're gonna kind of slip it around this adjustment bar and then sort of slip it around everything. And then it should sort of clip into place when you've got it. 2 Phillips head screws to tighten it all down. All right, everything looks good. Time for the big test. So I strongly recommend you test it before you put it all back together, but I feel really good about this. Boom, that is awesome. All right guys, that's it. That is repairing the ignition actuator pin and also the ignition switch to get this Jeep running again. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you on the next one. She runs!